Welcome to week 2 of this class. Before I begin the discussion about Hobbes today, I just want to note that this week you will have your first exam. You have exams every 2 weeks. That'll be due at the same time as everything else this week. But just note that in order to take the exam, you'll also need to download the Respondus Lockdown browser. There's a link available in the description of the first exam. There's also information at the top of the Moodle page about how to do that. If you're having any issues with that, please feel free to send me an email or set up an appointment with me, and I'll be happy to talk about how to do that. But make sure that you don't forget to take that exam by the end of this week, so Sunday evening at 10 p.m. Okay, let's talk a little bit about Hobbes. So again, what we're doing right now is we're talking about different theories of ethics, right? And these theories of ethics are broad ways of thinking about what ethics is, where it comes from, and how we ought to understand what the right thing to do is in any given situation. So for this one, we're going to talk today about Hobbes. And Hobbes gives what's oftentimes called a social contract theory. So this is Hobbes. He's giving us what's called a social contract theory. And what Hobbes does is he begins with understanding or a view of what life would be like if there were no government, if there were no broad society, if there were no regulations, no understanding of property, if there were basically no rules, right? And what other students have compared this, I haven't seen the movie, but students in the past have compared this to The Purge, right? So this is what would happen if there were no laws suddenly. He thinks what would happen is we'd be in what he calls the state of nature. The state of nature is sort of wild, right? Basically, imagine if there were no laws, right? Right now, when I was just looking outside at my yard, and people don't come and take the lettuce that we've planted in our garden, and they don't come and steal our plants, and they don't come and just camp in our yard without talking to us, because there's this broad notion of property, and there's rules and laws in place that would prevent some of that. But if there were no laws, then maybe people would come to my garden and take the strawberries that are starting to grow and go plant them wherever they wanted to, right? It would be sort of wild, right? And basically, the reason it would be so wild is because humans have needs. Right? And those needs include things like food, shelter, water, clean air, health, social interaction. There's all sorts of needs that we have, right? And those needs are fulfilled by resources. And depending where we are, those resources could be limited in various ways, right? So if we're in the desert, there's not going to be a lot of water, right? If we are on a mountain, there's maybe not going to be much. I don't know. You can see how on a mountain there's going to be a lot of firewood, right? But maybe there's not a lot of good shelter because it's so sloped that it's hard to find a good place to sort of set up camp, right? There's all sorts of ways to think about this, but resources are limited in various sorts of ways, right? And he says that because of this, right, we have needs, we have wants and desires that are fulfilled by various sorts of resources. Because of this leads to quarrel among human beings, right? There are 3 main types of quarrel, he thinks. So one is competition. This is just basically saying, hey, I need some firewood too, right? Or this is someone saying, hey, I want those strawberries. Hey, I want those raspberries, or whatever, right? So this is competition over the same good. That's one form of quarrel that would exist in this state of nature, right? Another is what he calls diffidence. Which is basically, I feel a little bit insecure about my own status, my own situation. I'm worried about people taking stuff And so to defend my stuff, because of my insecurity, I actively seek out fighting other people, or I create barriers between people, or whatever the case may be. So because I feel insecure about what goods I have, it leads to fights, right? So the first time in competition, it's like, hey, we both see a strawberry, we duke it out over the strawberry. This one is, I have a strawberry, but I see you walking down the street, and whether or not you've looked at my strawberry and have even thought about taking it, I say, you know what, just to be safe, I'm going to go punch you, right? Or whatever the case may be. Okay, and then the final one is power, or I think he calls it glory. And this is basically when you're trying to hoard goods, or obtain a ton of goods, take more than you need, to show yourself as powerful. This is basically, there's several reasons why you might do this. One is because, it feels good to feel powerful, but another one is if you look really powerful, if you have a ton of strawberries, and strawberries is a running example now, if you have a ton of strawberries, people are like, oh, I'm not going to F with that guy, because he's clearly beat up a lot of people to gather all those strawberries, so I'm not going to touch him, right? So it creates this sort of extra set of defense for you and for your goods. Okay. Hobbes thinks that without any rules, this is what our world would look like, right? And I don't know how well you would do in that society. I would do very poorly. I'm not very great at fighting over things. I'm not particularly good at it. And also, it would just sort of suck, right? I mean, you would be constantly just trying to do the most basic things, like make sure people didn't invade your house, or people didn't take your food, or people weren't, trying to contaminate your water, or something. Just the most basic stuff would take up all of your time, and so you'd never be able to do fun stuff like watch Netflix, read books, go to school. There's all sorts of things you just wouldn't be able to do because you'd be so focused on just the bare minimum basic needs of a human being. So Hobbes agrees. Hobbes says, look, we all sort of recognize this, right? That in that world, it's problematic. We're not able to do the stuff we want to do. And so he says that there are natural laws that come out of this. Laws of nature is what he calls them. I'm going to write them up here. So those laws of nature include this one. First law. Everyone should endeavor towards peace. Okay, why should you endeavor towards peace on Hobbes' view? Well, everybody's going to want to endeavor towards peace because it's going to increase everyone's security, right? It's more or less this. It's saying, look, I'm going to agree that you can keep your strawberries and I'll keep my strawberries, and I'm not going to go attack yours if you don't come attack mine, right? And that way we can all relax. We can all sit down and enjoy our strawberries and not eat them while worried that other people are going to come take them, right? We can actually open up a book and read a book or something like that. And so by endeavoring towards peace yourself, you're sort of creating a context, creating a situation which other people can endeavor towards peace as well, and so you can all sort of live a better life, right? It's a social contract, hence why it's called social contract theory. There's this contract that we have between people, right? That says, well, if I go towards peace, then you go towards peace, then we're going to live in a better world, right? And this leads directly into then the second law, which is basically we can mutually, we should mutually give up rights insofar as other people do it as well, hence the mutual here, right? So we should be giving up our rights to everything, right? Hobbes says that in the state of nature, everything that exists, I have some sort of right to it, right? Because there's no property rights, nothing belongs to anybody in the state of nature. There's no government, there's no sense in which property makes sense, so I have a right to everything. But Hobbes says, well, that's problematic, right? And I should be willing to give up my rights to everything, right? I can say, yeah, I no longer own everything that exists in the world, insofar as other people are willing to say the same thing, especially insofar as it allows me to say, well, I do own this stuff, right? As long as you agree that I own this stuff, I'll agree that I don't own the other stuff. If you agree that you own that stuff, but not everything, right? And so because we're all willing to mutually give up our rights to everything, we can therefore have rights to some smaller amount of things. Once again, it's a social contract, right? Because you agree to this, I can agree to it as well, and we can both live a better life than we would otherwise be able to, right? Because you've given up your right to my strawberries, I've given up my right to your strawberries. Now, again, we can sit in peace and enjoy our strawberries rather than being worried about someone taking them, okay? So, ultimately, Hobbes thinks that justice is going to derive from these sorts of mutual givings up of rights, right? It's basically contractual at the end of the day. And what's really interesting about social contract theory is it makes morality, in some important sense, an invention of humans, right? I mean, Hobbes calls these natural laws. He thinks this is the natural way that we would act given the situations that we find ourselves in. But it makes it sort of ethics is sort of an unnatural state, right? In our most natural state, we're competing with each other, right? It's only because we don't like that competition, because it's bad for us, that we come to this conclusion that we should treat each other ethically or with justice, or not steal your stuff and you won't steal my stuff, and so on and so forth. So it sort of becomes an artificial creation of humans. That's sort of an interesting result. It's not necessarily wrong, but it's an interesting feature of it, right? And so on Hobbes's view, to act ethically is always and everywhere to sort of ensure my own personal benefit, because even when I'm being sort of self-sacrificial, I'm still sort of holding up the rules that benefit me personally or my family or whatever the case may be. So Hobbes sort of at his heart is really focused on this sort of, at the end of the day, he's motivated by this sort of selfishness, self-centeredness, right? In a way that Mill is certainly not, right? And Kant isn't as well, right? Because at the end of the day, he's thinking that the reason that you really want to do the ethical thing is not because it's good for other people, not because it's your duty, but because it's going to be beneficial to you, right? It's going to create the circumstances under which you can do and live well, or your family can live well, or whatever the case may be. Okay, that's all for Hobbes. Until next time.